yourself to us.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Myrna Phillips. I have been retired since 1961 and lived in Winnipeg since 75 and lived in Brandon for 12 years in the 60s, and then I lived in Thompson in the north. I've been a single parent since 73, and so childcare, of course, is one of the critical issues for single parents. And I worked in the north doing an adult education program, coordinating it in 10 centers. One of them was called Women, Family, and Society, and we covered a wide variety of women's issues. And so, again, all the range of women's issues in the early 70s were just blossoming, the women's perspective on the issues. So I've been in that battle since the late 60s, early 70s. I had a neighbor, and when I lived in Brandon, we lived side by side. And my daughter, it was just after my daughter was born in 70, and she came over one morning and said, Myrna, there's this book I want you to read, because we'd been talking about her husband was a prof at the university. My husband was one would consider to be, an ideal marriage situation. We were discussing, why are we dissatisfied? Like, what's missing here? We should, jump up in the morning with smiles on our face and say, it's a wonderful world. I started reading the book, and it was The Feminine Mystique. And in The Feminine Mystique, Betty Friedan talks about the problem with no name. So that's where our feminism started. Like, that's it. It's the problem with no name. We're not crazy being dissatisfied. So we ended up, she and I, going through our situations and saying, well, what can we do concretely? We thought, okay, the first step we can do is ask our husbands for enough money to pay a babysitter so that we could have an afternoon off. Because as anyone knows, like, it's a 7-day-a-week, 24-hour-a-day job. And we got up the nerve and we asked our husbands. It was $5. That's all it was for a sitter in those days in the afternoon, like $1.50 an hour or something. So we got the sitter, and then we had to decide where we would go. So we decided that in Brandon at the time, there was a big railway hotel called the Prince Edward. We call it the Prince Eddie, like the Fort Garry Hotel. And at the back, because it was a railroad hotel, they had a red caboose attached that the pub was in. So we decided we would go to the pub for the afternoon. So we did that for several week after week, and had a wonderful time just chatting without having to, look to see if the little ones were, pulling at our legs or whatever, or having to go to the bathroom. And we just had a wonderful, calm, quiet afternoon, drinking a few beers and just having a really good heart-to-heart discussions about everything. And I had a friend, Phyllis, and Phyllis said, when I told her about it, well, can I come? And Sue had friends that said, well, can I come? So it turned out that within a few months, there were like 20 of us. And on Thursday afternoon, sitting around a big table in the red caboose at the Prince Eddie in Brandon. And out of that, we formed the Brandon branch of the Manitoba Action Committee eventually. But we planned a big women's conference. I was president of the Park Community Centre, and so we got it for free, and we invited folks out from Winnipeg, and we had a wonderful, Brandon still has an amazing film library, and we got films from the library. We set up a daycare, and we did it like we used to have the church bazaars, So for the children, like we had a fish tank, but we had discussions on everything, to do with sexism and feminism, whether it was reproductive choice or childcare or equal pay for work of equal value, or the whole range. So, and at the time, the Women's Bureau in the province was just being developed, and Mary Eadie had been appointed the director. They hadn't really got it open and set up, but like we had Mary Eadie out from the Women's Bureau and to do workshops. And so just out of reading The Feminine Mystique and having the nerve to have our husbands cough up $5 every week.
Isn't it a great story?
Yeah.
It was before the election, and we were having input on what the platform would be for the upcoming election. And with all the background work that so many of us did, all over, women from all over constituencies, all over the province, we ended up getting, out of the 10 platform issues, 5 of them were women's issues. And one of them was childcare. And in fact, in our first term, we did all 5. And so when we were elected, the Premier asked me if I would take on putting legislation together for childcare, because all we had at the time was city health and safety regulations. So I made an appointment with Drew Perry, who was the director of the child care office, and Mary Humphrey, who was the assistant director. And the 3 of us are sitting in the office, and I started telling them about what from my experience and working. And so I said, I want to be parent-controlled, etc. And so they looked at each other and they grinned, and Drew reached over to his filing cabinet and pulled open a drawer and lifted out this file and said, maybe this will work. And they'd been sitting for the 4 years under Sterling Lyon wanting, to have some legislation. Let's see what we would like, and if we could have legislation, what it would look like. So they had it all mapped out with staff-child ratios, program components for small and large motor sections, and staff qualifications, and physical, how many square feet, etc., and what you had to have, dark rooms and sleep rooms and bathrooms with small toilets and goodness knows what. Anyway, and they had it all developed in legislative language. And so then I got to take it into caucus to get it accepted. And this one member of caucus who I'll never forgive, he was quite well respected and had more power than little old me from Wolseley. I wanted only nonprofit centres. And he said, well, if there's a profit center and they want to pay whatever the going rate is, why should they not be able to do that in a free country, in a free economy, and blah, blah, blah. So he convinced the rest of them to leave that in there, much to my chagrin. So one of the things that I'm the most proud of is getting that legislation through. And we passed it in June of '82 at the last day of the session. And of course, at second reading in Manitoba, we're one of the few provinces where anybody can sign up for second reading committee to comment on a bill. And so there were lots of childcare directors and people in the field that were very concerned about renovate their facilities because, of course, most of them were in church basements or whatever they could find, and how they could afford to renovate to meet these standards. And secondly, how they could afford the staff ratios and the qualifications in terms of paying staff. And so, we had to assure them that this was the legislation and it would be the regulations and the funding that would then enable it to be legislated, and that before the regulations were finalized, that there would be plenty of opportunity for consultation. Mary, Humphrey, and I traveled all over the province having meetings with parents and, childcare boards, staff. We went everywhere. And we got really good feedback. So they had a meeting with the Winkler and the Morden groups together. Don't worry about it. So when they raised the issue of content, this NDP government is going to come and indoctrinate our children and to become communists or something. In the discussion, I was able to say when they raised this, I said, look, this is why it is so important to have a parent-controlled board, because the parents decide, their board decides the actual content. I said, we're interested in whether you have a large motor part of your program and a small motor part. If you want to have the children holding hands and sing, hop around in a circle, you can decide whether they're singing Ring Around the Rosie or Jesus Loves Me. That's your parent input and control. But you have to have something where they're moving and something where they're having quiet time. The outline and the legislation, and we took their feedback about needing money for renovations and staffing, and their concern also, a lot of them throughout the province, was the concern that they'd had women working in their childcare for years who had no formal childcare training or education, and they didn't want them to be displaced from some who didn't know the community or had all these newfangled childcare philosophies, When we assured them that we would be setting up the Staff Qualifications Board and that a person could apply and their years of experience would be considered as an equivalency to, say, level 1 or whatever, that, or they might be recommended to take a few courses, evening courses or summer courses or something. So anyway, once we had the chance to talk to parents and their boards, really good contacts, so that as things were being developed, we could check and say, what do you think about this? It went through without a hitch, whereas a lot of major changes like that. But when the regulations were passed, they went through without a lot of... So my next step after getting that done was to get the money. We did get, every year, we did get a substantial increase, but it was always the struggle of, say you've got $10 million for the upcoming budget. Do you put the whole 10 into present centers to, pay the staff more, to do more training, to, improve facilities, or leave those ones alone? Let's expand and have another, 20 childcares. So you always had to balance it, between expansion and upping the funding for present ones. When there's this gigantic need for expansion, I used to say, we pay the guy at the exit of the Bay Parkade to take your money for looking after your car during the day than we pay for a childcare worker to look after your children for the day. And then one time when I was fighting to get more money, and of course, there's this emergency in the cow-calf industry. We need $10 million more for, to support this industry. 10 minutes later, he's got $10 million. And I'm sitting there saying, holy, I have to fight tooth and nail to get an extra $2 million. So you don't have any trouble getting money for calf care, but I can't get money for child care.